I am a developer, designer, and accessibility expert at a usability consultancy in Columbia, South Carolina. We're called True Matter. And for those of you that don't know, because I have to explain this all the time, usability is basically, or UX as we call it for short, is studying how people interact with digital products, so websites, applications, how they use them, and then how we can learn from that and make things better. So that's essentially what we do, and if I boil it down to like the finer points. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. This is probably the first time I've ever taught an online class like this with everybody on Zoom, so you'll have to be very patient with me. But I figured for us to get started, we could just kind of go over some simple housekeeping things. You're gonna have a lot of questions, I'm sure, as we go. And so what I'll do for the sake of time is I'll take breaks in between certain sections where anyone that has a question can then ask it either in the chat or you can use the little raise your hand feature and we can just go in order based on whoever asks first. After we're done, I think the team plans to share the slide deck that I'm using as well as a recording of this. So if you feel like this is a lot for an hour and a half, which it will be, and you're worried that you didn't get it all in, you'll be able to go back and watch this and look at those slides, and hopefully that'll help. As well as I'll be on the Slack channel. So if you guys have questions as you start working, throughout the program, weeks from now even, I'll be available if you want to reach out. It probably won't be immediate that I'm able to answer, just depending on different time zones and everyone's schedule being different, but I'll try to get to all of those and be available as a resource if you guys need me. So without taking up any more time on this, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I guess while we're getting that set up, just to give you guys a little bit of my background, like many of you, I started coding in high school. I was never formally trained in this. I don't have a computer science degree. I actually went to school for graphic design. But I was always really interested in coding. I even started out with CSS, which we'll be learning in the next section, more so than HTML. And really, the reason I got into it, it's kind of sad. This is going to age me, but I don't know if any of you know what MySpace is or was. It was basically pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, all of that. I wanted to make mine look cool, so I learned CSS just so I could customize it and make it look cool, and that's really what got me into coding. So for anyone here that thinks that this seems like a lot of information and that it's just kind of a mountain of stuff that you have to learn, while that is true, it's very easy to do it on your own. There are tons of great resources out there, which I'll be pointing out. And so I really encourage you to not feel super overwhelmed by it and just kind of embrace it pieces and parts. And that's really the best way to learn this. So let's see, I'm gonna try again. Everyone's seeing that. And if at any point you guys need me to zoom in, just let me know. I'm going to have the chat open so that I'll be able to see that. I see someone's, oh, your mom told you about MySpace. That doesn't make me feel old at all. Don't worry. I'm just kidding. All right. So the site that I'm going to show you guys how to build today is completely made up. I threw this together because I wanted to give you guys a chance to test out every piece part there is to HTML and CSS in kind of a neutral environment where you're really just copying a lot of the work that I've done here. That helps in two ways. One, it gives you something to check against. So as you're writing the code, and we're going to do that together during the session, you'll be able to see what it should look like based on my example. And so that really helps when you're learning to kind of be able to check your work and make sure it looks correct. But also, it's kind of dumb to just code something and it like not exist or not be purposeful. So for those of you that already have some idea of what you want your end website to look like, you're more than welcome to change out the content that you see here, to change out the name of things. It doesn't matter what you actually use. But as we're working, I do ask that you stick with the common sections and elements as I'm coding them, just so we can kind of cover our bases. And you'll see all that in a minute. So yeah, this cat rescue does not exist. All the things on this page I just stole from Google. I don't recommend that. It's not a good practice. But for learning and for this class today, it was the easiest thing I could think to do. So this is a site with CSS. HTML you can think of as the skeleton, and CSS is like the skin and the clothes and everything that makes us not look like an icky skeleton. So we're going to just talk about HTML today, but I am going to have you guys add some styles to your website that we're building, just so that it doesn't look super gross. And I'll show you what it looks like without any styles. It's not fun. But let's go ahead and get started with, I got a little presentation here. Once we get into the actual coding, please let me know if you need me to zoom in. I am on a very large monitor, so sometimes depending on the size of the screen you're using, it can get a little hard to see. So HTML, what is it? It actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language, if you didn't know that. No one calls it that because it's a mouthful, so we call it HTML. And it's basically a computer language. There are many out there. These are languages that computers' algorithms are designed to understand. HTML itself was actually invented in 1990 by Tim Berners-Lee, and he was with the CERN project, which hopefully many of you have heard of. They're responsible for the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. And they were trying to share their research information back and forth. These scientists, they were all over the world at the time. And they were super annoyed that there wasn't a repository where they could put all this information that they all had access to. So some of us, if we have our computer, we might have our file system designed a certain way where, we have a folder for pictures and for our homework and that kind of thing. And all these different scientists had that on their own computers. Well, something similar to that. It probably looked really awful by comparison to today's computers. But they all had that separately, and they wanted a way to kind of combine it. So they built the first web page, and I'm going to show you that. It's not great, as you would expect. It's actually gotten a little better. They've added some kind of navigation, some ways to get within the site itself. But this was it. Plain and simple, some text on a page. But what was really great about it is that no matter where you were, if you had an internet connection, you were able to pull this up in a browser and access it. And everyone could add their information to it and share it across the world. So this was the first example of that. And now, obviously, we do crazy things with it. I have this open because we're going to embed a video. But I mean, this looks way better, even by comparison to YouTube, to our first website. So it's come a long way. And it has evolved during that process. So HTML itself started with a very small group of kind of parts. We can think of them as like puzzle pieces. And now that has grown in itself. And so we are actually on using what's now called HTML5. That's what we'll be learning today. You can still just call it HTML. It's common practice to use the latest and greatest technology, especially when we're learning. And so let's look at some of that. So HTML is just a syntax. I'm sure all of you know what that means. If not, I put a little definition on here. But similar to how we know that a sentence ends with a period and starts with a capital letter, that tells us where it starts and ends. HTML has a similar syntax that allows us to tell when something starts, when it ends, and what it means. So we can tell when reading a document if something is, say, a list or a paragraph or what have you. HTML is very similar in that way. Instead of using a capital letter and a period or exclamation mark or what have you, HTML uses these tags. So it's a combination of a greater than and less than symbol, and then another content in the middle, and then another greater than less than symbol with a slash sometimes. And we'll dive into that a little more as we look at the different elements. But this is the way we can always tell where something starts and where it ends. And that can be very important because HTML is very similar to a Word document or Google Doc, whatever you use, structure, wherein we kind of nest things within each other. So I'm sure many of you have done an outline before, maybe when doing like a research paper. It can be very helpful, to get you started. And with an outline, you'll typically have some headings, maybe some subheadings, some lists within that. HTML is very similar to that. It has hierarchy and a structure that allows us developers, which is now all of you as well, browsers, which are what interpret the code, and people to see what we intended with the content based on that hierarchy. All HTML pages start with what we have here, doc type HTML. And this little element is going to be at the top of all of our pages. And this basically just tells the browser, hey, this is HTML, as opposed to all the many other languages that we could be using. So we're going to, in a second, start our document, and you'll see that up there. It is then followed by this tag, HTML. That is, again, kind of a reminder because computers are stupid. They're just series of algorithms trying to interpret this code. They need a lot of reminding that, hey, this is an HTML document, but just in case you're worried, here's the HTML part. So we're going to always have that nested right under this first declaration. Below that, we have two main sections in every HTML document. We have a head, which is exactly what you think it is. It is the part of the document that contains essentially all the behind the scenes type things. So your thoughts. These things tell the browser what to do. They add a lot of extra information to the page, but we never see any of this on the page itself. So if we were to open our site in a browser, we would never see this. The body, on the other hand, is all the things that you can see. So these two things are very closely related. That's probably why they called it head and body, but they do two very different things, and we'll look at that in detail. Within the head, there are several key parts that we always want to include. The first one being our title. Just like any document that we create, or a book, you have to have a title to tell people what it is. Same thing with HTML. We want to make sure that each page in our website has a title that tells the person viewing that page what it is, and maybe what the site is, because sometimes as you kind of dive in deeper into pages, that can be helpful. This serves two purposes. One, it's really good for just people in general, especially for someone that might have a disability that forces them to use what's called a screen reader. I'll talk about this a lot as we're going, and that's specifically because it's part of my expertise, is making sure that websites are usable for those with disabilities. A lot of people, you'd be surprised how many people, and I won't lie, these are usually older adults, I'll just say it nicely that way, are surprised that, oh, blind people use the internet or use computers. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what goes into making digital products usable for everyone, including those with disabilities. And one of the easiest things we can do to make sure, in this case, our websites are accessible to them is using proper markup. So everything we look at today, I'll point out parts where we're adding specific little extras to make sure that our site is going to be usable for everyone, regardless of the device they're on, whether it's a phone or a computer, the browser that they're using, how maybe old their computer is, and if they have a disability or maybe they have slow internet. So we're going to make sure that this site is great for everyone. That's our goal. But having a page title, I mentioned a screen reader. This is something that those with low vision, maybe a learning disability, there are lots of different disabilities that it's helpful to have this device, which essentially reads what's on the page out loud. And so a page title, in this case, is the first thing you hear when using a screen reader. So you can imagine if it's not there, it can be really confusing to open up a browser tab and hear nothing but the URL, which is what would be read. So we always want to make sure we have a title for that reason, but also for search engine optimization. So I'm just going to say Google, because that's the big one. Wants us to have a title because it uses that for indexing and for helping search results to come back easier. So if we don't have a page title, it's going to be a lot harder for Google to index your site and for people to find it. Some of the other things that are going to go in the head that we'll look at are references to files. One of those being our CSS, which is a cascading style sheet. We'll go into more detail in the next lesson about that. But that controls the way our site looks, as well as how our site responds on different devices. We'll look at that. And references to maybe some fonts. We're going to use some Google fonts, which is kind of fun. And any other information that we need to include about our site. In our body, unlike our head, again, this is the stuff we can see. We have just all the things you would think of: videos, a form, maybe a map, titles, paragraphs, lists. All the things that make up the site are what go in the body. So I'm going to ask that all of you, and I apologize if y'all were asking questions, I couldn't see my chat. And yes, the body is the text in color, so I was a little late to see that. Someone had asked if that's part of the body. That's all the visual stuff. So everything that looks good and makes your site worth seeing is in the body. So I'm going to ask that you guys, and you should have already installed this, open Visual Studio Code. I am on a Mac. I should have probably stated that early on. So things are going to look a little different for me. We're going to pause after we open VSCode because I'm sure some of you might have issues or have questions, and we'll address those then. But typically, this would either be in your start menu if you're on a Windows machine, or in my case, it's in my application window. I already have it open. And so we're going to go ahead and open that up. And let me close mine so you can see what it looks like when it first opens. So it should look like that, roughly. Your little menu bar at the top might look a little different. You won't have any recent things open probably unless you've already been working in it. But you'll see new file and open folder. And what we're going to do is make a home for our site. So for me, I'm going to do this on my desktop. You can put it anywhere you want in your computer. So I'm going to minimize that real quick. I'm just going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this, oops, I just wanted to rename it, cat website. So now I have a cat website folder with nothing in it. So if y'all can go ahead and do that. I'm not sure where my little chat went. And then when we are in Visual Studio Code and open, we're just going to open that folder. It has nothing in it, but we're going to go ahead and open it because that is going to be where all of our site files, pieces, parts live. And so when we open it, we will see roughly this, kind of a cat website with a little down arrow. That means there'll be things in it, and then you'll still have kind of the welcome screen. I'm going to pause. Is anybody having issues getting Visual Studio Code working? Please let me know either in the chat or you can raise your hand.
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you just want us to make like a new folder and then add this extension inside the folder?
No, this Visual Studio Code will add that. So if you don't see it, don't worry. I think this is probably due to something I have set up or installed in my instance of Visual Studio Code. But you may or may not see this. You can completely ignore it and act like it's not there.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anybody having any issues? For some reason, I thought I'd be able to see if y'all were raising your hands, but I cannot. So I apologize for that. It's bigger. There we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but if anybody runs into anything, just throw it in the chat. So the next thing we're going to do is actually make our kind of folder structure for the site. So there are two main things that we always have to have. The first being our index. That is the first page that you would see in the site. And the page that we're going to primarily start with, it's our home page. That's what we're going to call it. This name originally came from the fact that it was actually used as an index for getting to the different files that they were sharing with that first website that I showed you guys. So we're just going to click on that cat website or whatever you've called your site folder, and we're going to hit add new file. And we're going to call this index.html. Simple as that. So that's the one big thing you always have to have, because without it, you don't have any pages. And then the other thing we want to add is a place for our CSS. That's the styles, what makes it look nice. Our images, which I'm sure we'll have some. And we're going to make a folder for documents too. I don't know if you'll have a document on your site, but just for the practice, we're going to add all this in. So we're going to now click on new folder, and we're going to call this one CSS. Nothing in it yet. Another new, oops, I nested it in that. Another new folder, we're going to call this one images. And lastly, I'm just going to call it docs for short. So you should have right under cat website or whatever you've called your site, CSS, docs, images, and index.html.
So for the index.html, is there like the orange thing that's on the side? Is that just supposed to pop up?
Yes, that will display based on the type of file it is. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and open up the site that we're going to be working on just to show y'all a few things as we're working. So you can see the difference. I have some images that I've added. So you see they get like a little purple image icon. Our style sheets get a little hash icon. They all have different ones. And I think it's really just to help you quickly recognize what it is. Is that not showing up for you?
Oh, no, I got it.
Okay, perfect. And I lost my workspace, so let's open that up. Oops. I'm gonna open that back up again. Sorry about that. Okay. And I'm actually gonna move this one over here so I can see it and reference it. So there are a couple of different sections here when using VS Code. Let me make this a little smaller and get out of the way. We have kind of our file viewer over here on the left. That's these little paper icons. Then we have our actual code editor area, which it'll add tabs for every file we have open, so it's nice and convenient. We have a search, which our sites are going to be pretty small that we're working on, so we might not ever use this. This allows you to type in a word and it'll find it in any of the documents in your project, basically. And then I have a few extra icons here that you might not have. You can disregard these. These are really extensions that I use for my job every day. But the main thing we're going to be using is this file viewer, so we can open our files and just see kind of the overall structure. So we have our first page. How exciting. If you were to look at this outside of Visual Studio Code and you were, say, looking at it in Explorer, which is what we use on Windows, or in my case, Finder, you would see it kind of like this. I'm in my cat rescue site. I've got my index, and I actually have built out a few of our pages, which we'll be looking at. Each of them gets an HTML file. And then we have our folders, CSS, images, docs, and within those, oops, I actually had one in the wrong order. We have our style sheets and any images that we're going to use. So this also, whatever you build in Visual Studio Code, it's building that structure in your file system at the same time. So I wanted to make sure I showed you guys that so you know where this all lives. So if we wanted to see our page, we would actually open this index.html. I'm going to click open with Google Chrome, which I actually already have it open. So it's probably like, what are you doing? And that was my cat page. You guys are going to open yours and there's probably nothing there. But the way we get to this is it's essentially wherever you've saved your HTML file. So in my case, it's on my desktop, it's in the cat rescue folder, and then it's index.html. Is anybody having issues getting theirs to open? You should just see a white screen, nothing at all. Great. All right, so next step. The first thing that we want to add, if anyone can remember, is our declaration for what this is. Doc type HTML. So we're gonna make sure you add that very top. And under that, can anyone remember what goes next? Anyone that was listening closely? It's not a big deal if you don't, but just figured I'd ask. And again, of course, I can't see the chat because I keep losing it. Yay, thank you, Isabel. So HTML. So this is our HTML tag that, again, because computers are stupid, this is just true. It tells it again, this is of the actual HTML portion of our HTML document. And so you saw that when I pasted that in, and I'll type it just so you can see. Visual Studio Code actually put the closing tag for me. This is something called IntelliSense. This is just built into the editor. That's what this is, code editor. I don't know if I mentioned that. And so a lot of times while we're coding, Visual Studio is going to recommend things, and it's going to close our tags for us and try to guess at what we're doing. That can be really, really helpful when we're learning. It can also be really, really annoying if we typed the wrong thing or it guesses something that we didn't intend. So always watch out for that. Make sure that if it auto completes any of your code, that it's what you wanted, because it can throw some weird stuff in there. Another really helpful part of Visual Studio Code is if I hover over, if I put my cursor over an element, which is what this is called, it'll tell me what it is. So it represents the root of an HTML document. So while you're learning, this can be really helpful if you forget what something is for or why it's there. This will be especially helpful when we get into CSS, and I'll talk about that next time. All right, so within our HTML section, we have two parts, the head and the body. So again, I'm going to type the first one and it's going to close it for me. You'll notice that after creating a tag, I usually hit enter. The reason for this being is I'm going to put stuff in there and I just want to leave a space for it. So under our head, we're going to have our body. So roughly everyone should kind of look like this. I do know mine is formatting as I save. Some of you, it might be doing that. I don't know if that's there by default. And if I can remember where that is, it's a very helpful thing to have. So if you go to preferences, which again, if you're on a Windows machine, this might be a little different to access. And you go to text editor, formatting. There's this little checkbox that says format on save. If you want to go ahead and click that, it's going to be really helpful because anytime you save your file, it's going to make sure that the proper indentation has been added. As developers, we do this because it really just makes it easier to look at. When you're working in a document that has 500 lines, you'll notice that it numbers them. It can be kind of a headache to find things and to see it all. So by adding, essentially it's just a tab, or you could do 4 spaces. Everyone has their own style, doesn't matter what you use. But by doing that, I'm able to see that within this tag, HTML, my head and my body live. And so anything else I add, so let's say, I'm going to jump ahead a little, add a heading, it's going to indent it for me because it lives within the body. So just like an outline, as I mentioned, that's how this is going to work. So it'll always be kind of nested within itself. Another really cool part about Visual Studio's editor is that I can collapse sections by clicking on these little arrows. So as I'm working and my document gets very long and I'm, have a headache because I've been staring at it for hours, I can collapse sections and then I'll be able to find stuff a little easier and keep my work really clean. So everybody should have this kind of baseline here. Let me know if anybody's getting stuck. The next thing that we're going to add within our HTML element, there is what we call an attribute. So attributes are, you can kind of think of them as like what they actually are for us. So like an attribute of mine is, I'm really funny. Probably not, but I think I'm funny. So that's an attribute, and HTML elements have their own set of attributes. There are hundreds, so we will not cover those in detail. But I will be giving you guys a link to W3C, which is an organization that is awesome, that I learned almost all the HTML, everything I know from. And they have a page that literally shows you every attribute that exists and what you use it for. So HTML has an attribute called lang. Any guesses what that means? Just gonna tell you, it's language. So the language of our document, this is something that we have to, again, tell the browser because it's not very smart. And we do this because browsers look for the language of the page and make sure that they're displaying it correctly. So if a page is written in, say, a language that's read left to right instead of right to left, we would define that here in the language attribute, and it would make sure that that was displayed correctly. It does a number of different cool things, but it is vital to add because if our user is using a screen reader, I talked about what that was earlier, this tells the screen reader how to read the page. This can be really bad if we don't do it, and let's say our page was written in Spanish. The screen reader will try to read, by default, it just guesses, it'll try to read the page in English, so it will pronounce all those Spanish words as if they were English, and it makes no sense. So we always want to set this, and in our case, I'm going to be coding in English today, so I'm just going to put EN. That is the abbreviation that this attribute uses. You notice I put an equal sign. Every attribute is followed by an equal sign, and then we always put the value for our attribute in quotes, double quotes. So we should all have that there at the top. The next thing we're going to add, and I'm going to be pasting a lot of this in for the sake of time, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about these different metadata items. Metadata I'm sure you guys are familiar with. This is just extra information that we're conveying to the browser and to different technologies, but it's never seen. So the first one that we're going to add is the character set that we're using. Again, this is related to the language that we're using, not the actual spoken language, but the syntax language, which is HTML. Different browsers can understand different character sets. And the one that we're going to use is Unicode. I'm not going to go, again, for the sake of time, into detail about what all these mean. But this is something that we add just to tell the browser, hey, while you're trying to read this thing, make sure you read it as if it's Unicode. And that just helps things all go a lot smoother. You see I hovered over it, gives me a little bit more of a description. If at any point you're curious about something I'm talking about that I'm not going into detail, this is your little cheat. You can hover over it and find out more. So we're adding our meta elements. This is just a line that represents, like it's saying here, a link or a reference to a script or to an attribute that defines something about the page. So it's just going to be meta char set, which stands for character set, equals UTF-8. And I'm actually going to zoom in. Yes, so whenever I finish a line, the only time I hit enter, based on the question, is if I want to go to a new line. So what I'm doing right now, and I actually probably should have said this because it's just a habit of mine, after I code something, let's say I've got a few lines I just added, I always save my work. I'm just really paranoid. I've had situations where I've been working for hours on something, I didn't save it, and I'm just stuck. So I encourage you to do that. If you are on a Windows machine, it's going to be Control S. You're just going to click Control S. If you're on Mac, it's Command S. And so I just saved it, and you'll notice that it formatted it a little different than I had it. I'm also going to click this one and save it, so we'll keep that setting. And so now it's all in one line because I don't really have any other stuff in here, but yeah. So I don't actually have to hit enter unless I want to add a new line, which I'm doing each time just because it makes it easier for y'all to see. Another thing that I like to do as I'm working, and I'll be doing this so that you guys can be reminded of why the heck this is on the page, is I like to add comments. While we're working, we can add comments by typing something. And either manually typing less than, exclamation, line, and you notice it turned all of this green. That's because it's now unaccessible code, like the browser couldn't read it. It's just like a comment that's there. But I never actually manually typed this out, so it was even hard for me to remember how to do that. What I do is I highlight the line, and then if you're on a Windows machine, you're going to hit Control K C. If you're on Mac, like I am, I'm going to hit Command K C. So Command, then K, then C, and it's going to comment it out for you. I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts because it saves me time. But the other option, if that's something that's hard to remember, is you can highlight it. And I thought there was a way to comment it out, but there's not, so you can't do that. I apologize. So I'm going to add our comments. I'm going to paste one from my other page that I worked on for what this is. This is specifies the character encoding. And then I'm going to add our next meta tag, which is going to define the viewport. And what this is, essentially we are building what's called a responsive website. That means that anyone that opens this site on any device will be able to see it. And for the most part, it'll look okay. So it will scale down so that it's smaller on a phone, and it will scale up if I'm on a large monitor. Most of the sites that you guys probably use on day-to-day do this. It's just common practice. And we want to make sure that our website does this as well. So here, again, we're putting our meta tag, and the first attribute that we're going to add is name, viewport, and then we're going to go ahead and define some things about that. So the first is just saying that we want the width of our page to match the width of the device that's displaying it. Pretty straightforward. The second half of this is defining the zoom level, so what it looks like when it first loads. I don't know if any of you have ever used that on a browser where you go to view and you can zoom in or zoom out to make things bigger or smaller. That's essentially what this is setting just as you're getting started. And y'all can, if you need to be typing as I'm talking or need me to pause at any point, just let me know so you can catch up. All right, so there's one other thing one thing that I said was very important to have in our head, which actually none of this is in my head. Oops. I'm gonna fix that. Sorry about that. If y'all were typing this outside of your head, it needs to be inside. So you will now be probably on line 4. Working down. But the next thing that we're going to add that we don't have here is our title. And so for my site, I'm actually going to call it Cat Rescue because that's what I built out earlier. I just put the name of the site, and then I thought, you know, I'll go ahead and say what this is for. It's a cat rescue. What does a cat rescue do? We save cats. So I just added a little line after and then put that in. You usually want to use just standard characters here and not make it too long. But it's nice sometimes to add a little extra to the title to say what your site is for. So everyone should have that. And now we're going to add a few things that I'm not going to go into detail because they're actually for our CSS portion. But I don't want your website to look bad because it will if we don't have some style sheets. To show you that, here is my site with some very, very loose styles. I didn't really go crazy with it because I just wanted to give you guys an example. What we look at next time will be like way flashier and prettier. But if I were to remove the styles from this, it would look like that, which isn't very pretty. So I'm going to send you guys in the chat a style sheet that I've already marked up for you to add to your site structure, just so as we're working, your site looks a little better. And so that it's easier to see what you're working on. Because when it all looks kind of left aligned and tight like that, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. So to add that, after my title, I'm going to add link. Oops, sorry, I hit save. If you ever see my stuff jump around like it just did, that's why, because it formatted when I hit save. And you guys, again, should be saving as you work. You'll notice all of this is now aligned because none of this is nested within itself. So it's not like hierarchical. These are all at the same level, so to speak. So I added this link reference. This is essentially telling the document, I want you to use this resource. So in this case, it's my style sheet, which I am now going to put in the chat. And so what you're going to do with this style sheet is you're going to download it from Zoom, and you're going to add it to your CSS folder. You remember I showed you guys, oh, there, it just added it, in your folder structure. So wherever you created your site, you have CSS, you're just going to put that file inside that folder. And so once you do that, you'll be able to add this line link, and this is the actual what it is. So it's a style sheet. And then href, this is what we use for our actual URL. You'll see this in a number of different elements, is going to be our file path. So I know you guys are manually typing this. So one thing that Visual Studio will do for us is if I type out href equals, it's going to automatically open my folder structure and allow me to select something from it. So I'm going to, CSS is highlighted. I'm going to hit enter. And, ooh, I don't know why it did that. CSS. Let's try that again. Hold on. And I guess for some reason, it's not going to the next one. But your other option is you can do CSS and then a slash. Oh, that's because I didn't actually save it to my folder, guys. I told you to do it, and then I didn't do it. Teach myself something. I don't have the link to the style sheet. I'll go back to that in a minute so you can see it. I think, let's go back out and put this in my, so remember I made a new folder structure. I don't have anything in my CSS folder. So I'm gonna put that in there, styles.css. So now that I did that, this should work the way it was supposed to. So I'm gonna do that again, href equals CSS, enter, and then it should say styles.css. And it should add it just like that. And my chat keeps moving. Hopefully that worked for everybody. If not, let me know. You won't be able to see anything happening yet, obviously, but you should also see over here in CSS, you now have a styles.css. So that added our, essentially the stuff that makes it pretty to the site. The other thing that I'm going to add, and I'm going to paste paste this in the chat. So everyone copy this out of the chat, assuming it'll let me paste HTML. Let's see. Yeah, that actually doesn't work very well. So we'll add this in the CSS portion. I was going to add some Google fonts so you guys could see, but that is a lot to type out. So we're going to skip that and save that for the CSS. So last thing I have on my site, and we'll talk about this probably in the CSS portion too, is a favicon. For those of you that don't know, I don't think it's in anyone.
I was about to say that you only sent the style sheet to me privately and not to everyone. Yeah.
So how do I thought it was in the global Zoom. Oh, I see. I gotta hit everyone. Oops, doesn't like it when I do that. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, this should work. It's to everyone now. It kind of combines everyone in one chat, so that was very confusing. So again, after you add that, you should be putting it in, here's my site, my CSS folder, styles.css. And when we want to add it, after you type your href equals, it'll highlight them as you go, and you just hit enter, and it adds it for you, handy dandy. Sorry about that, y'all. I should fix it now. But the favicon, this is basically the little icon that shows up on the browser tab. It also will show up if you bookmark a site on your phone or your iPad. It'll show up as the app icon. So there are different ways we save out favicons and make them different sizes. And we'll probably make one of those for your site when we get into the CSS portion. So I'm just adding that so y'all can see what it is. This is typically most of the things that would be in your head. The only other thing I don't have here is I might reference a JavaScript file, which y'all will talk about that in your JavaScript section. So that is it for the head of our document. Hopefully everyone has that. And keep losing my chat. Don't see anything. Okay, great. So let's get into the fun part, the body. Right now, if you opened your site in the browser, which we did, you're not seeing this, you're just seeing a white blank page. So let's go ahead and add something so we can make sure this is working. I'm going to go into what all these different elements are in a second and go back to my slide deck, but just so that we can see something on our page, we're going to add a heading. Headings in CSS use a tag that starts with H. And you'll see here Visual Studio tried to guess what I wanted. I actually want heading level 1, which is H1. And headings go from 1 to 6. And in a little bit, I'll talk about the hierarchy and how those work. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and put a title on my site so that when I go to the browser, let's open this in the browser actually. I opened my nice one. This is the new one. It should say cat rescue over to the left. Everybody's seeing that. Hopefully, I'm sure you're very excited to have a page with just a title on it and nothing else. Yay, great. Okay, so let's talk about some things that are in the body. I'm going to go to, oops, I lost my slide deck. Sorry if the movement makes anyone nauseous. Let me know. Must have closed it. All right, so we're to the fun part. So the part that you can see in the body. The body is made up of what we call semantic elements. An element is semantic because it has a known meaning that is conveyed to both the browser, to us as developers, and to anyone viewing your site. So something like a paragraph, we all know what that is. in HTML, it has a special tag called the p tag, which we'll see in a minute. And it tells the browser, it tells me that that's a paragraph. There are some tags in HTML that are non-semantic. You can think of these as really just containers. They don't serve any purpose except to group things in our code so that we can manipulate them. Those two things are div and span, which we'll be using. A div is a block level element, and a span is an inline element. And I'll talk about those in a second. Semantic things like our footer, I bet you can guess what that is. It's at the bottom of the page. A table, I'm sure you guys have all used tables in Word documents, things like that. Something like a UL, anyone want to guess in the chats what that might be? Just for fun. I always like to see what people think some of these are. It has semantic meaning, so it means something that the browser and the developer would know. So yay, Samantha got it. Unordered list. So just like we have unordered lists, we actually have OL, which is ordered lists. Some of the elements are abbreviated in weird ways that don't make a lot of sense, and we'll look at some of those, while others are really obvious, like footer. So that makes HTML kind of hard sometimes because you're always guessing, what it is. But after you're used to using these different elements and building out pages, you kind of just memorize it, just like you do most things you learn. So within our body, the first things that we always want to start out with are our sectioning elements. And hopefully the Zoom stuff isn't covering this up for you guys. Sectioning elements basically just tell the browser and people looking at the page what each part of the page is for. So again, this is so similar to if you're like building out a Word document or anything like that. You have a header where you have your title, maybe your date. For a page, we have a header, and then we might have like in our header navigation. That's something, we use to get from page to page. It can either be across the top or sometimes like go down the page or sometimes hidden in like a little icon, hamburger icon is what we call it. And then below that, we have kind of our body of our document, not to be confused with the HTML body, but where all of our content lives. And we put that in what's called our main tag. And then within our main tag, we have sections. So a lot of this, again, you can kind of guess what it's for based on what the tag says. So that makes it helpful. We have things like articles. These are self-contained, not articles in the traditional sense, like an article you'd read online, but like a self-contained group of things. We have, oops, I clicked my mouse. We have a side, which is kind of like, if you ordered a main dish, you have like a little side salad. That's basically what it is. And then our footer, which goes across the bottom of the site usually and has some boring stuff like the copyright or like a privacy link, just basic things. So these are really the structure, kind of the skeleton of your site, of your page. Every page will have these common elements, and then within them, we're going to put other stuff. Those other things that that go in there have two categories. One is block elements. These are kind of your big boss elements. You can think of them that way. They are going to take up a new line. So if this was an outline, so to speak, your block elements would be like a heading. They would take up the full width of space that's available. So if that's a page, that means the whole width of the page. And they contain other things typically inside of them. So I'll show you what those look like and how they're different in a minute in the browser. But these are very common things that you'll use, like again, our table, headings. We've got an aside, an article. Some of these sectioning, all the sectioning elements that we just talked about are also what we call block elements. And so really this is important for understanding how you can nest or, put one HTML element inside another. And also when we get into CSS, this is very important to know. Within block elements, we have what we call inline elements. So you could think of these, if we're talking about an outline, as if I have a heading and then I have like a list of things, that list is only going to take up the space it needs, and it's going to live inside or, under that heading. So kind of in that group. So inline elements are things like links. That's what A is here, a button or an image. These are things that are not going to start a new line, so they're not going to be their own section. They're just kind of within a section. And they're only going to take up the space they need. And that's important to note when we get into styling, because it's kind of frustrating when you start adding things to a page and you're like, oh, why is this thing next to this thing? I want them underneath. So that's how these block and inline elements interact together. And while we're coding our page in a minute, it's just good to keep in mind, because we never want to put a block element inside an inline element. And we never want to put, you can put block elements inside of each other and inline elements inside of each other, but never block inside of inline, if that makes sense. So let's look at some of those. Back to the editor. So we added an H1, which is heading level 1, and that is a block element. So if we look at it in the browser, and I'm going to show you guys, I usually save this for the end, but I think this will really help as we're working. My favorite tool, and probably the most useful thing for learning, the inspector. So hopefully you all opened your site up in Chrome, Google Chrome. If you did not, I would ask that you go ahead and do that now, because we're going to specifically talk about Chrome's inspector. So I'll give you all a second to do that. And once you have this open, we're going to right click on Cat Rescue or whatever you called your site, whatever you put up there at the top. And we're going to click on inspect. You should see that option when you right click on anything on the page. And for some of you, this might open up as a new window, or it might open up like it did for me on the side. And so look in there, we can actually see our HTML. How cool is that? Was everybody able to get that up? If not, let me know. It's pretty neat. You can see your HTML as it is in the browser. And you'll notice as I hover over H1, I have my cursor over it. It's highlighting the H1, which was Cat Rescue in this case. And you see how it goes all the way across the page? It takes up all that space. That's because it's a block element. Now, if I were to add a non-block element, let's go ahead and do that just for fun. I'm going to add a link. That always starts with A, which is very counterintuitive because we also have this link element. It's very easy to get confused and think, oh yeah, link, I use the link element. You don't, you use the anchor element, which is A. And we're going to add an attribute. That attribute is going to be one you've already worked with, href. And this is what our link is. So in this case, I'm going to make a link to YouTube, youtube.com. So that's all I really need to add here. So to close it, I just typed my greater than symbol and it closed itself. Now, obviously, if we put this on the page, let's see, I'm going to save it. You'll see nothing. The reason for that is I added a link, but I didn't actually add the text part that displays for the link. And we never want to do that because then obviously no one can see it. So I'm going to put YouTube, save that, and I'm going to refresh my page. Yay, a YouTube link. So if I hover over that, you'll notice it's highlighted, but it's only highlighted for that little bit of space. That's because it's not a block element. So it's only highlighting it a little bit there. So this looks pretty bad. So we're going to start making some, going pretty quickly and actually building out some page structure pieces. And the CSS file that I sent you is going to start making things look a lot better as we go. So I'm going to remove what I've done so far because I don't need it. And we're going to create our navigation. All sites have to have navigation, unless it's a single page, like a flyer, and it doesn't have any other pages in your site, which is possible. That's perfectly acceptable. We don't need navigation, but in our case, there's a cat rescue. There's a lot of stuff you got to do to rescue cats, and we want to get people to donate and contact us and tell them about the cats we're saving or what have you. So we're going to have a lot of pages. Your site might be different depending on what you're doing with it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create my header. If you remember, we talked about sectioning elements. These are kind of the skeleton of the page itself. And so I just typed header. And within that, I'm going to put my navigation, which uses the abbreviation nav. And you'll notice it's nesting correctly as I go. And I'm going to, so you're going to see me do this in a few places, and I want you to do it as well. I'm not going to go into detail about why, because that's for our CSS portion. But I'm going to add an attribute called class. I'm going to set it to row. And this is going to make sure that my nav looks a lot nicer than it would if I didn't do that. And I'll show you in a minute what it looks like without. So the first thing I want in my navigation, and we're going to reference my pretty cat site first, is I want to have my logo and the name of my site. Otherwise, no one's going to know where they are. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a link. One thing and this is part of, I mentioned I do usability. One thing that I've seen a lot of people do when I watch them use the internet, which sounds really boring, but I find it fascinating, is a lot of people go up to this logo area and they'll click it, always expecting it to be a link. And they're right to do so, because most websites, if we click on that top thing, it actually takes us to the homepage. So I'm trying to think of a good example. We go to my company's website, I go to a page, click on the link, or click on the logo, it takes me back to the homepage. This is a common pattern that people just started doing one day when they were building their websites, and people that use your site, just started to expect it. So we're going to do that too, because it's helpful. So we're going to create a link, which if you remember, it's href is our attribute there. And to link to our page, our home page, we're actually just going to reference that file. So you notice it pulled up my tree structure here. I'm going to arrow down, click on index, and that's our home page. Then I'm going to close that tag. So I should have a nice little simple link here. Now here, instead of just having text, we're going to put an image in it. If you recall, inline elements, which is what our link is, can have other inline elements nested inside of them. An image is an inline element. So to add an image, we're going to start our tag and we're going to type img. And then again, we're going to need to reference that image. So here's where it's different. Everywhere else you see we've used href. Here for images, we use the attribute src. I'm going to say src equals, and then it's going to pull up our folder structure again. So for you guys and for me, I don't have any images yet. So let's go get one. I'm just going to do, I think this is actually what I did was cat rescue logo. And then I just kind of looked through them and I picked one I like. Obviously, I didn't look very hard. I picked the first one. For you guys, when you have a logo that you design, you're going to add that in place. But here, we're just going to use this one. So normally, what I would do is I'd click on this and then I'd copy the image or save it. But since I already have saved it and I cropped it so it looks nicer, I'm just going to put this in the chat. And this time, I promise I'll send it to everyone. And then you guys can use it just so you have something for now. Hopefully that went through. And again, I copied this. This belongs to someone else. So I would never actually publish this where anyone else could see it because that's copyright infringement. And I'm sure some designers spent a lot of time on this and it's really lovely. I would never want to copy their work. So don't ever do what I'm doing right now. But for the sake of learning, we don't have time to design a logo, so we're just going to borrow one. All right, so now that I just put that in my folder, oops, images. If I spelled images right, that would help. And I do a slash, you'll see it suggests, oh, did you want logo? Yes, I did. And so now that will reference the correct image that I want to use. You'll notice whenever I have a tag that isn't open, my editor is trying to tell me that there's an issue. It does this by turning red like we have here. That's basically just so I know that something is broken. That's very helpful while we're learning. So image tags are a little different from some of the other ones. It doesn't have a closing tag. It's what's called a self-closing tag. And so to close it, we just put a slash and our greater than symbol. So nice and clean. Another thing, though, that we are going to add and that you should always add is an alt attribute. And what this is if someone is, again, using a screen reader, or if they're on like a slow internet connection, this alt text will show in place of the image. And if they're using a screen reader, this is what will get read because obviously I probably can't see the image. So that attribute is alt equals, and we're going to put cat rescue logo. Typically, this alt text should describe what's in the image. So if I put an image of kittens playing with yarn, my alt text would be maybe like kittens playing with yarn on a sunny day. You want to think of alt text as if you were on the phone with someone trying to describe a picture, that's what your alt text would be, is whatever you would say to them. When we have things that are like maybe decorative that aren't important, let's say I had like, I'm trying to think, like this line here, let's say it was an image for some reason. I wouldn't want that read by a screen reader and it's not really conveying any meaning. So I would actually just put alt equals blank, nothing there. But we don't want to do that because this is our logo and it's important. So we closed it, we used our alt attribute, and then we're going to go ahead and put our name of our site. So I'm going to put, and actually I need to do this the other way. Just put our name there. And I lost my site again. Here we go. And it should look something like that. Not very fun. But I'm going to make this a little bigger, and I'm actually going to pull it out of my link. I should have done this before. I'm going to make it on H1 because it's actually the title of our site. And you notice it threw it over here. That's because I did just realize I sent you guys some messed up styles. I'm on a computer and I can see the link. That's probably the case. Sorry, I just noticed in the chat. Oh yeah. For those of you that aren't on your computer, I apologize. It will only send in the chat and you'll have to download it from there. I don't know how this will work on other devices, having never tried it. So I just mentioned that I messed up the styles for this, so we're going to cheat just for the sake of this looking good. But when we get into our CSS, we're going to fix it. So go ahead and put your H1 inside your link. If you recall, you should never, ever put a block element inside of an inline element, which our link is. We're going to do it today because it's not going to break anything. But when we do our CSS, I'm going to show you how you would fix this so that we have an example of something gone wrong, because it did go wrong. But if you move it inside of your link, I'm going to switch these around. Sorry about that. You should now see the title of your site right there next to it. Oh, wait. Should be underneath. Yeah. Okay. So you should have something roughly that looks like this. Now, let's add some of our actual pages. So to do that, we're going to hit enter after our link, and we're going to create an unordered list. So again, that's UL. And to put items in our list, this is a kind of counterintuitive. We're going to add what's called a list item element. And the tag for that is LI. So we're going to have, at least today, we're going to do our mission and contact us page is what we're going to make. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and I'm going to add my link. So that's href. And I'm just adding this for now because I already know what it's going to be, but we're going to create that page later. So I put our mission.html, and then inside the link, I'm going to put our missing. I'm going to put our mission, the text. So that is our first navigation item. And if we go back, yay, it shows up there. So I just realized, looking at my example, why the styling looks wrong. So I apologize for this. I'm going to reorganize this to make it right. Your H1 shouldn't be in there. I don't know why I thought I'd done that wrong. I did this right, but I was missing a non-semantic container. If y'all remember what that is, that can be span, S-P-A-N, or a div, D-I-V. So I want to basically have my logo and my name of my site be kind of like in a little block, and then have my navigation beside it, which will look like this. So to do that, I'm going to use this container. So I'm going to type div, and you'll notice this stuff is all outside right now because I did this out of order. So I'm going to copy that last tag and just move it, and just move it to after my H1. So it should look like this for everyone. So that is basically putting the link and my page title in this little container. The container means nothing. It doesn't get read. It doesn't get understood by the browser. It just kind of allows me to style things the way I want, essentially. So I'm going to add a class to this div, and we'll talk about what those are in the next session. But I'm just doing this so it looks nicer for us today. I'm going to call that class logo block. And when I save that, so much nicer. It arranges everything super pretty. So hopefully you guys are seeing that. I'll go back to this so you can see. And if you are getting stuck or have any issues, let me know. I'm trying to catch up on the chat right now, actually. Okay, so that's our logo block. We used our first instance of a div, and let's add a couple more pages here. So I want this to look a little nicer, so I'm gonna paste mine in. You can add as many pages as you want. Oops, did that wrong. Go outside of my list item, and I'm going to add 3 more list items. I'm going to add an about page, a contact us page, and a donate page, because that's super important. I need money for my cats. And one thing to remember when we're building out navigation based on user tests, people tend to always look at the items either at the beginning of the list or the end. That doesn't mean they don't see the things in between, but these typically are the first places their eye go. So you want to make sure that anything that's mission critical to your site or to what you're designing for this program is on the end or at the beginning. So in this case, money is important for my cats, so I put donate on the end there. So there, we've got some navigation. It's looking nice. Lines basically 21 through 36 of your document should be all navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and move on for the sake of time, and let's go ahead and build out the actual page part. So we talked about with sectioning elements, the main tag. This is everything that is the body, so underneath your header of your document. And in that, I'm gonna make kind of like I want to do like something with an image and have like maybe a heading and a button. So to do that, I'm gonna put in another div. And I'm going to put these classes on them, if y'all can go ahead and add these as well. Just again, I've added styling in that style sheet I sent you, and so this will make it look nice. And then within that, because of the way I did my styling, I'm actually going to put another div. So these are block elements. If you recall, they can always be nested within each other, no problem. So I want to add a big title to kind of like welcome people to my sites or tell them what we're doing. And I'm going to say, we want to save all the cats, exclamation mark. So you saw I used an H1, put my stuff inside it. And then under that, I'm going to put a paragraph, kind of just about some stuff. And since I don't want to write anything right now, I'm going to use what we call lorem ipsum. This is some Latin that developers and designers use to fill spaces. It doesn't really mean anything in the context of my site, but it's gonna make it look nice. You can type whatever you want here. Just make sure you put, at least a couple words so it's an actual paragraph, or a couple sentences, I mean. And then I'm going to add a link so that they go to the donate page, because again, I want money for my cats. Let's see what that looks like. Ooh, it's pink. So you'll notice there's this big area right here, and you're probably like, oh, what goes there? That is our cat image. And I actually added that with CSS, which we will cover in our next session. So right now it's just going to be a big white space, but I promise you'll have a beautiful picture of something when we get into our next section. So last thing I'm going to add to my homepage, because I don't really have a lot going on here. It's really my other pages that are going to have more content, as my footer. So that uses the footer tag, just like this. And I'm going to just add some copyright information. And to add the copyright symbol, you remember we talked about the character encoding that we're using. Some characters, HTML has a hard time, or rather the browser has a hard time interpreting them if we just copy and paste them. So we have to write them in Unicode. So I'm going to put in the copyright symbol, and the Unicode for that is here. So ampersand #169 semicolon is what we're going to do there. And then I'm going to put the year 2020 cat rescue. So when I save that, it should Yay, copyright 2020 cat rescue, or whatever you call your site. So we have a home page. It's not a lot to look at, but it's there, and it's ours. And let's quickly figure out how to build a new page. All right, so in our structure here, we want to make sure we have cat website highlighted or at the top level so that we don't accidentally put something in one of our folders. We're going to do add file, and we're going to do our mission.html. This is going to be like the page that tells everyone what we're doing. Right now it's nice and blank, and to save time, what I'm going to do is the things on this page, mostly my head, my header, and my footer are going to be the same on every page, right? We want it to look consistent, and that way if you go to a new page, you can still navigate and get back and forth. So I'm going to copy everything on this page, and I'm going to paste it onto the Our Mission page. After I do that, I'm going to first update my page title because this is a new page. And I think I'm going to change this up. I think I'm going to have the site name be after my little line and then put the page name before. So Our Mission. That's the page title. And then I'm going to go ahead and after the header, which handy dandy, I can collapse this. If y'all remember, you can click the arrow, collapse it down. I'm going to go to our main section and I'm going to remove what's there because that's the part that's going to change because this is a new page. All right, so you guys should have something like this. Should be on line 39 and nothing there. Looks like that. And if you click on that link, it should take you to the page because we added that to our navigation. Oh, I forgot one other thing that we're going to change. If you ever noticed when you go to a site, the page you're on, like in the navigation, it'll look different. It won't look like a link anymore. That's because it's the active page. I don't need to click on it because I'm already there. So in this case, Our Mission is the active page. So I'm going to remove the link just on the Our Mission page because obviously that's we don't need to click on it here. I'm going to go ahead and fix this so it's on the same line. All right, I'm going to save that. And so now Our Mission is just regular text. And this tells the user that's the page we're on, but still allows them to go click on these other ones. So it should look roughly like that for you guys. All right, let's add some stuff to this page. So let's see, I'm gonna look at my little cheat sheet here. Let's go ahead and let's add some of our, let's add like a page kind of intro. So I'm gonna do a div with this class page intro. And I'm going to add the page title. So Our Mission. And this is an H1 because that is the topmost heading. Below that, we have H2, H3, H4, H5 through 6 that we can use. We want to make sure that when we're using headings, we're always using them from 1 to 6. You never really get to 6. I don't think I've ever used H6, but it's very common, similar to if you're using an outline, you'll have your main heading, a subheading, and maybe another subheading after that. You always want to use them in order. The reason for this being is that it's a lot easier to navigate a page with a screen reader if you're using the proper hierarchy. Whenever we have things like, oh, an H1 and then suddenly an H4, it's very confusing to the user because it kind of makes you wonder, well, where was 2 and 3? So we want to use these in order. And this is the top of our page, so we're using H1. I'm going to put another paragraph under that that's like, we're trying to save all the cats. It's important. I would be a really horrible copywriter, by the way. All right, so that's going to be at the top of our page. I just saved it. Let's see. Yay, it's over there for some reason. Oh, I forgot. For the styling to work, we need another div around that H1 and the paragraph. My bad. All right, now let's see. Much better. All right, so you should roughly have a page intro div with that class, and then a div without a class, an H1 and a paragraph. That is going to be at the top of our page. All right, so let's put some more stuff on here. So I'm going to make another div. This one's going to have a class content block and row. Oops. Should be around line 43. And let's use some new sectioning elements. I'm going to put in an aside, which, as I mentioned, I like to remember it as like a side salad. It's just kind of a nice little thing that's added in addition to your main thing, which in our case is going to be a section. And I'm going to add an image here. One of my favorite sites to get free images that I can use copyright free is something called Pexels, P-E-X-E-L. And of course, I want a picture of a cat because that's what I'm all about. Oh, that guy's cute. All right, so I found my cat picture at pexels.com. And I'm going to do save. Oh, it's actually got a free download. I'll go this route. So when I hit that, it asked me where I wanted to save it. I'm going to find my cat website. I'm going to save it to this images folder. And I'm going to rename it because I don't like that name, cat image. All right, so I'm going to go back. Let's add that. Again, the tag for an image is img. And then to add the reference to the actual image, we put src equals images, cat image. And then my alt text is going to be gray cat looking up. I guess it's just like looking up, sitting in a basket, I guess. That's what it was, right? I'm going to close it because remember, this is self-closing. And let's go back. I should have a picture of the cat. Oh, he's very cute. And you'll notice it's underneath my heading and my paragraph here. And let's put something beside that. So in the background, all of my style sheet is controlling this. If I were to comment that out, just so y'all know how much of a deal styles are, this page would look like that. Pretty icky. The image is giant, by the way. You can't even, I'd have to zoom out like yeah. So my styles are doing a lot of work for me. I'm going to reset that, zoom. So we want to keep that. All right, back to where we were at line 45. So I have my little image, and now I want to add some content. So I'm going to use the section element. And, oops, let's refresh this so it looks right. Within that, let's add some stuff. So we're going to use our next heading. We have an H1 already. Let's go ahead and use an H2. And I'm going to tell people ways they can help. And I'm going to add some paragraphs. You can stick whatever you want in this paragraph. I'm going to use my handy dandy lorem ipsum again. Save that. And look at that. We've got an H2 and a paragraph that should be there next to your cats. Hope that's working for everybody. All right, and let's add another heading. So I'm going to go under my paragraph. And I'm going to add an H3 because remember we have H2. The next heading underneath that would be an H3. And I'm going to put things that we need. Oops, not things that we need. And I'm going to make a list. So we're going to do an unordered list again, UL. Let's see, what are some things we need? We need cat food, probably. Cats are hungry. We need maybe cat litter because they poop, because they eat. And let's do small toys because they like to play, right? I hit save again. And we have a list, nice little bulleted list. So our unordered list will always have bullets, ordered list, numbers. That's the difference between those two. So this is what your page roughly should look like right now. I know I'm going pretty fast, but I just realized what time it was and I don't want to go over. But you should have a heading, 2, 3, and a list. And now I want to, I think, add kind of another section similar to this. So as a developer, I like to save time because I'm coding a lot. And so I often copy, paste, and reuse things. So I'm going to do that now. And I liked the way this looked. So I have like 2 things side by side. I did that with styling, but I like this layout. So I'm going to use it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy lines 43 through 64, that content block kind of thing, right? And I'm going to remove the things that are inside my sectioning elements because those are what I'm going to change, but I want to keep that layout. So it should roughly look like that now at line 65. All right, so I'm going to put these new things in here. I think I want to give people some statistics like about cats and rescues. And I'm going to put this in the aside this time just so it's different because this is kind of just like a little thing of facts kind of off to the side. And this time I'm going to do an ordered list. All right, so I got OL, got to put our list items in. And I have a bunch of statistics here that I already did. So I'm just going to paste those in. You'll see there's 4 list items about cat statistics. You can put whatever you want in here. That should show up right there to the left. Nice. Kind of looks a little icky, but I can fix that with styling later. And then I want to add a video. So in my section here at line 78, I'm going to put an H2. And you'll notice up here when we had our, where am I going? We had our H2 and then our H3. I'm in a new section now, and just like if this was an outline, I feel like we need goes along with ways you can help, but statistics doesn't really make sense as an H3 because it's not part of that section. So I restarted at H2. You can always go back up a level within your document. That's not a problem. That's perfectly acceptable to do. It's really just skipping levels that we want to avoid. So I made a new H2, and I'm going to call this Watch Our Rescued Cats, because that's what you're going to do. We're going to put a video. And to do that, this is very simple. I'm going to go find a video, which I did. I found one on Animal Planet's YouTube. You can pick any video you want, and they'll always have this share option down here. We're going to click on that and click on the embed. So share and then embed, and you see all this code, this HTML code. We're just going to copy that. And we're going to go to our code, and under our H2, we're just going to paste that in. Oops. And save it. And we should have a video about cats. Yeah. So I don't like how close together these two things are. I think they're a little squished. So I'm going to add something to kind of help separate them. And what that's called is a horizontal rule. That's what the tag means, but it's actually just a line. Not sure where that name came from. So between my first content block row div and my second one, you see I just collapsed those down so you can see, I'm going to add an HR tag. And this is another example of a tag that doesn't get closed. It doesn't have like a thing to it. That's not real. It's just a single tag that's HR. So I'm going to save that. And I added a nice little line between our two sections there. Yay. So the last thing that I wanted to cover real quickly, just so we have a couple minutes, and again, I'll share this with you, is how we validate our site. All the things that we just wrote, you were copying from me, so they should be valid, but it's very easy to mess up and to maybe nest something incorrectly or not close a tag. So for the sake of example, real quick, I'm going to leave this open, my last section, right? I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go validate my code. So the site for this is, this is probably what I would normally do anyway, is just W3C validator. And what this does is it just looks at your code and it makes sure that it's correct and that there aren't any errors. So it's very handy, especially when you're learning. And they have this validate by file upload. So I'm going to select my Our Mission page. Oops. And check. And it's probably going to tell me you have an unopened or an unclosed tag, which it did. So unclosed element. And because that one is unclosed, all of the other elements that are nested inside of it also are going to show as errors because it doesn't understand how they can be closed inside of something unclosed. So I encourage you, whenever you're coding, if you feel happy with your work, like you're done, go ahead and upload those pages here and check them. Make sure you'll see some warnings, and they obviously give you a lot of helpful information about how to fix them. And I encourage you to always do that. The other way you can check your work, just as a refresher, because we did this at the beginning of the class, is our inspector here. You'll notice there are two sections at the top. We see our HTML, and this should reflect exactly what's in your markup in your editor. And then at the bottom, we have our CSS portion, which we'll cover next time. So that's pretty much it for today. I hope you have a semi not super ugly cat site or some type of site that you've started on. I encourage you throughout the week to, when you have time, kind of keep adding to this. because next week when we do CSS, you're gonna actually get to make it look however you want. So we're gonna try to make it look like my demo site, but then I'm gonna have you guys just start doing whatever you want with it, and being able to have me there if you have questions and stuff. I think sometimes having a working session like that can be very helpful. And so just let me know throughout the week if you have questions. I think eventually be on the EmpowHer Slack channel, so you can reach out to me there. And I hope that you have a good week and happy coding.